Good morning. All right, we are talking about Nixon today, right? All right, any questions over the readings? All right, is everybody ready for the quiz? Okay, I want you guys to think through this one, kind of make sure you hit all the pieces. You guys to decide if Ford should have pardoned Nixon, and so you'll make the call, and then I want to know why. So be ready for that. All right. All right, so why is Ford known as the unelected president?
Because he didn't fix the economic problems that he was supposed to, that he promised.
Okay, so that's once he becomes president. Was he elected to be president?
He was Nixon's vice president. And
Okay.
once he left office, he took up as the official president.
Okay, so when Nixon resigned, he takes over as president. However, there's another step. Was he elected vice president? No. He is the only person that has ever served as president that was not elected to either the vice president's position or the president's position. Does that make sense? So we've had other vice presidents who stepped up into the president's office, but they were elected as vice president. He is the only one that was never elected to either one. So we'll dive into that. He was actually a representative from Michigan for 13 terms. He was looking at retiring. He decided, you know what? I've done all the stuff I can do. I'm going to go ahead and retire. And at that point in 1973, Spiro Agnew, the vice president, is being brought up on charges for a lot of corruption and tax evasion. So he finally agrees to say no contest. He's going to plead no contest to the tax evasion if they will drop the other charges. Now, what does no contest mean? Anybody?
You're not going against what they have charged you with.
Yeah. So it doesn't mean I'm innocent. It doesn't mean I'm guilty. It just means I'm going to go ahead and take the responsibility for the charges that they have given. So he is not declaring himself guilty, but in everybody's mind, you don't plead no contest unless something is going on. So if he is going to go to jail, can he be the vice president? No. So now they have to have a new vice president. But as this is going on, everybody is starting to understand what happened in Watergate. And they start saying, wait a minute, Nixon is implicated in Watergate, right? So if you know that your vice president is gone and your president is very, very likely going to be removed from office, what do you need to do as soon as possible? Who's going to run the country?
Isn't there another person underneath the vice president?
Yes, if there's like 13 steps, but
The Speaker of the House, right?
yeah. So they are trying to get away from, having that have to happen. So they're like, hey, pick a new vice president. But it's kind of interesting because the legislature, the Congress goes to Nixon and they say, hey, it looks very likely you're going to leave. So we are going to allow you pick whoever you want to pick as your vice presidential candidate, as long as you pick Gerald Ford. And so they are basically telling Nixon that we will approve Gerald Ford. We may not approve, in fact, we probably will not approve anyone else, right? So why would they do that? What do you want if your vice president has to resign because of criminal activity and your president has to resign over criminal activity? What do you think is the priority in their minds right now?
Finding someone with no criminal.
Yes, you want to find someone with integrity, right? You want to be able to say, look, I need somebody with integrity. Why do you think they grabbed Gerald Ford?
A good background.
All right, how many times has he served? 13. And during all those times, he has served with integrity, and they're like, we trust this guy. We know that if he says something, he's going to do it, and that he's going to work with everybody and try to do what's best for the nation. So Congress actually says, no, we want you to pick Ford. And so Nixon nominates Ford as his vice presidential candidate. He is the first vice president brought in under the 25th Amendment that says, hey, if the vice president or the president die, you have to select someone new, and that person has to be approved by Congress, right? So he is the first person ever brought in under the 25th Amendment. And then once he is brought in, the Senate approves 92-3, the House by 387-35, which are pretty incredible numbers if you think about it, right? This is a very political issue, but everybody is like, hey, this is the guy we want. This is the guy we can trust. So December 6th, Ford takes the oath of office, and May 9th, the House Judiciary Committee starts investigating and starts impeachment proceedings against Nixon. So if you think about this, October 10th, does Ford have any idea that he is ever going to be anything other than a representative? No. He's like, I'm going to retire as a representative. October 10th of 1973, and by August 9th of the next year, he is the president. So less than a year, boom, boom, boom. So August 8th, Nixon resigns. August 9th, Ford is sworn in as president. And he is the only person who comes in as the president who was never elected to either be vice president or president. So when he comes in, he says, this is a really difficult time. Everybody needs to work with me, and I will do my best to make the nation a better place, and I will do my best to make sure you can trust me. Now, the interesting thing is, right after he becomes president, he pardons Nixon. Now, I want you guys to think, if you think he should have pardoned Nixon, I want you to move to this side of the room. If you think he should not have pardoned Nixon, I want you to move to this side of the room. All right? So go ahead and go.
What if we just don't care?
You have to care. If you don't, then...
But like if we don't if we don't have any like opinion on that.
Well, everybody go ahead and go that has an opinion. Do you think it's appropriate for a criminal to be let go from criminal prosecution? Okay.
Say which side is it on?
So which side should I then be?
So if you think it was the appropriate thing to do, over here. If you think he should have pardoned, if you don't think he should have pardoned, go over there. All right. So I want you guys to quickly discuss and go ahead and go up to the board. We don't have a whole lot of room on the board here, but I want you to write down your key reasons for why you think what you think. Does that make sense? So have one person who can write pretty, if you can do that, and you guys come up with your top 3 to 5 things on why you think you're correct. All right. Yeah. So it would have been an embarrassment to the U.S., right? You're also in the middle of the Cold War. So the Cold War enemies would be able to...
Trying to not look like a bunch of goobers.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you have some ideas?
Yep.
All right. Go ahead and...
Even though mine isn't pretty either.
Yeah.
I also believe that it's also, there's like, believe it, there are people that are in the government that they can get away with criminal activity with the president. Pardon from their accusations.
Yeah.
It seems like they're above your.
So you guys have some pretty good ideas?
Yeah.
All right.
Hold on, let me get these or I won't remember.
And you guys can keep talking and update her as you need.
I think he should have expected the people to kind of come back and be upset about it, because, you know, I mean, they thought.
So, sorry, Jake, you're going to have to write bigger.
Bigger.
Yeah.
We can't see what you're writing.
All right.
What else did we say?
Anybody else?
Better?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what he said, like, try to destroy the evidence.
It really doesn't.
Yeah.
All right. Are you guys pretty solid?
Yes.
You can go ahead and sit back down.
Yeah. We like drug it out for like 3 years.
What do you mean drag it out?
Like if you got prosecuted, then the trial would have been like
Oh,
going
so-
on forever.
Just kind of end it quick, you know?
Yeah, it's just he's doing it one quick action.
You don't have to write sentences, but it's fine. Good.
Wow.
I think our 2 points are good enough.
Yeah. And I'll give you a third.
Oh, cool. Do the work for us.
Do you want a president in prison? All right. So while he's finishing up the third, I will tell you, in almost every class, it is very much like what you saw today. The vast majority of people go to Nixon should not have been pardoned, right? And a smaller group says Nixon should have been pardoned. We are not going to decide which is the best today. I just want you to see that there are two perspectives on this, right? So, which should we go with first? Let's go ahead and go with no pardon. Somebody tell me, all right, what are you talking about?
So what we were coming at from that angle was that since he pardoned Nixon, it was going to allow other officials or people that are in like Congress to feel like they're above the law, so that they won't be prosecuted for anything that they do that is considered negative to the nation.
Okay, so realistically, you're putting out the perception that the president can break the law and nothing happens, right? And you guys are saying, wait a minute, no. Every U.S. citizen is in the same boat. If you break the law, you should have to go to jail, right? Okay, all right. So, second piece.
That's evident. We feel like Nixon obviously was aware of what was going on, so he was clearly involved in the matter.
All right, and if he wasn't, and you go to trial, then you're exonerated, right? So, the only reason, like if he is guilty, the trial will show it, right? Okay, and what's the third reason?
Destroying his evidence.
All right, tell me what you're saying.
He was messing with the cameras from
Okay, so the tapes that they found had been messed with, so there was an obvious attempt to destroy the evidence. So again, it goes back to really likely he's guilty, right? So what's the key theme that you guys are looking at? It is no one's above the law, right? That's the main thought that you guys are arguing, correct? All right, so let's go to the other side. First one.
The whole, like the investigation as a whole would have made the nation look very bad, because like it's showing the world that like we don't like a trustworthy and good president, and the president represents the nation, so we made it look like we wouldn't have a good nation. and it all would have happened during the Cold War too.
Okay, so we're in the middle of a Cold War. We're in the middle of this big fight between capitalism and communism, and the communists try to use everything they can to say that we are horrible, horrible people, and we're like, oh, here, look, we have a criminal that we put in as president, and so it's going to make the U.S. look bad, right? All right, so what about the second piece?
That like, instead of, so whenever he pardoned Nixon, it was one day of really bad, and if he went to trial, it'd have been that, but for like months or years.
Okay, so this trial could have drug on for years. And every day in the news, you'd be talking about the president of the U.S. is a criminal, right? And again, not only within the U.S., but across the entire world, right? All right, what about the third one?
It's gonna look very bad if we put a president in prison.
Yeah, what do you do when you put a president in prison? What prison do you put this president in?
Was he a president before? He wasn't president before.
Well, he was a president when
When this comes to,
yeah.
okay.
And so it's like, what do you do? Do you really put a president in prison? And so, do you know what the real answer is? No one knows. There's ugliness on every side, right?
But aren't you like, especially today, don't they do like background check on you before you go like to election or something?
Nope.
They don't?
No, the American people are allowed to vote for whoever they want to vote for. So if you want to vote some mass murderer in, and the entire U.S. wants to vote a mass murderer in, legally we can do it. The other thing that's kind of interesting is when Bill Clinton became the president, there was a big issue because everyone at that time, if you had ever done drugs, you were not allowed to have classified material. And we were all like, he's done drugs. What?
How would they have known that? He done drugs?
Oh, so first off, he came out and said it. And secondly, I don't know. I mean, realistically, all of us had to go through a polygraph, had to go through, you document everything, and then they go back and they check all your family and your friends. But he was the president, so it's just kind of, it's waived, and everything, you can do what you want to do. And you will give access to the president for everything. So it's very fascinating that the American people have the right and the privilege to put whoever they want to in as the president. So, but yeah, it really puts the U.S. in a difficult position. It puts Ford in a very difficult position, right? Because I think everybody can at least see why he would have an issue. Do I put a president in prison? Do I make the U.S. look really bad? Do I let this go through a trial? Or do I let the American people think, hey, the president can get by with anything?
But don't you think the Watergate scandal in general was a really bad piece for the...
Oh.
at the end of the day, what would it matter? Their answers are very political, I'm just going to say.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
We're law-abiding over here.
but what president can also make mistake, and if you put him in jail, you are showing like your nation that you're doing the right thing of not having the person that did something wrong and not like face the consequences.
Yeah. And I mean, there is some concern that why isn't he facing consequences? I think history, being the only president in history to be removed from office is a pretty big hit. Now, am I saying he shouldn't go to jail? No, I'm just saying there are two sides of this picture, right? So once Ford does this, what happens to his approval rating?
It plummeted.
It gets torched. He goes from almost 3 out of 4 Americans thinking he's doing the right thing to, boom, under 50%, right? Less than half of the nation trusts him anymore. Some people accused him of making a deal with Nixon, but as I said, he did not make a deal. He didn't even necessarily want to be president. People said from Congress said, no, this is the guy we want. So some of the other things that happen, and all of these, if you notice, tie very tightly to Watergate and to what happens prior to that. You have the Freedom of Information Act, and they expand what the Freedom of Information Act can do. So anybody know what the Freedom of Information Act does?
Is that where you can view government documents?
It says that I can request any government agency give me information on something, and unless they have a very, very good reason not to, they are required to give you that information. And so this allows the American people to be in control of the government, right? Now, it is funny because you can use classification, you can use all sorts of stuff, and it can take a long, long time. But from being on the other side of that, I will tell you, when you get a FOIA request, it's like, okay, I have to make sure that I am providing the information the person has asked for, and I need to do it within a certain amount of time and make sure I get this done. So the next thing is the Privacy Act of 1974. Now, if I said, I want to know what is being taught in this class, is that an appropriate thing for a FOIA request? I mean, is it the American citizen's business what I'm teaching in this class? Okay, I would say yes. I mean, because I could be teaching you guys garbage, right? I could be teaching you stuff that is not historical, and they're like, hey, no, I want to know what you're teaching.
But isn't the whatever president of the school that like decides what you can and cannot?
Actually, the president doesn't pay attention to what we teach in class.
Really?
Yeah. So the American people need to be paying attention,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Now, what happens if I get a FOIA request that says, I want everybody in the class's social security number and their home address? Why not?
Personal information.
Okay, so this is personal information. The Privacy Act says, hey, you can go to the government and you can get information that is expected that people will have. But you are not allowed to reach in and say, hey, I want personal information about people. What if I said I want to know every student in this classroom and their name?
That's so personal.
That is personal information. There's no reason for everyone in the nation to know who the students are in this classroom, right? Now, there is value in knowing what I'm teaching, but there's no value in people knowing who is in this class or personal details about you, right? So the FOIA expands, hey, you can ask more questions, but the Privacy Act makes sure that, all right, your personal information is not going to be grabbed. All right, then they established the Rockefeller Committee to review what the intelligence agencies have been doing. Why would they do that? What have the intelligence agencies been doing that they should not be? Okay, they were helping Nixon, they were helping Johnson, they were doing investigations of U.S. people that were complaining or protesting against the U.S. government. Is the government here to tell the U.S. people what to do, or are the U.S. people here to tell the U.S. government what to do? All right, the people are here to tell the government what to do. So the intelligence agencies should not in any way ever be going around and investigating U.S. people unless there is a warrant that they have broken the law, or that there's probable cause they have broken a law, and you're investigating that specific act of breaking a law. Now, if you break a law and I am investigating that, can I investigate other things that you're doing? No, legally I'm not supposed to. And if I find other stuff that would not have come out otherwise, then you're not supposed to be able to use that in a court. So, all right. So Ford now puts out an executive order, and he says, look, the intelligence agencies have to be responsive to both Congress and to the president. So now, every time the intelligence agencies are going to do something, there are the big eight. And the big eight are the top person in the Senate from the Democrats, the top person in the Senate from the Republicans, the top person from the Intelligence Committee in the Senate from the Republicans, and the top person from the Democrats. Then you do the same thing in the House, the top Republican and top Democrat in the House, and the top Democrat and the top Republican in the Intelligence Committee in the House. Why would you want those 8 people to know everything?
They're leading their parties and the policies.
Okay, they're leading the policies and they are the lead for their party. So our parties are very, they push each other, right? So is there any chance that if something is going to assist one party and you have to tell both parties that it's going to get by? Probably not, right? One of the parties is going to say, hey, wait a minute, no, you can't do this. And so this is intended to prevent people from being stupid and doing the same kind of stuff that they were doing during the 60s. Now, why would you not want to give every single person in Congress all the information?
I think if something were to go wrong, then you have that many people to go after for it.
Yeah. So the Supreme Court had the leak of the Dobbs decision, right? Pre-decision. And I mean, there's 9 justices and there's maybe 30 other people that had access, and they can't figure out who did it. If you have over 300 people, how do you determine, there's 435, I think. How do you determine who leaked this? And what are the chances that with that many people, somebody's not going to say something? So they're like, we're not going to tell everybody, we're just going to tell the key people so that they can take care of things. The other thing that happens is over in South Asia, we back out of Vietnam. The North Vietnamese almost immediately start attacking into South Vietnam. As I think I said before, Nixon had thought, I believe, that he would be able to, as soon as North Vietnam started attacking again, he could say, okay, we made a treaty, now we need to go in and protect South Vietnam. Does that happen? No. The U.S. is like, we just don't care. The other thing that happens is the communists have infiltrated into Cambodia and Laos, and the Cambodians get into a civil war. The communists take over in Cambodia, and this becomes one of the worst genocides that the world has seen, at least in the 20th century. So you had the Nazis, you had the Japanese doing medical experiments on Chinese, you had the Turks killing many of the Armenians. You have lots and lots of really bad things that happen. This Stalin killing his own people. But this is probably the worst. Over 2 million Cambodians are killed by their own government. And that is approximately 1 out of every 4 Cambodians is killed by their own government. Why would their government kill them? Because the communists, one, say if you've lived in the city, your life is too easy, so they drive the people in the city out to work on the farms and do manual labor, but they don't have enough food, they don't have enough ability to get the food from place to place, and The other thing is they don't like intellectuals. So if you've gone to school, if you have a friend who has been in any other country, if you are religious, so Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, no one matters, you are killed. In fact, the weird part is, do you know how you determine if somebody's an intellectual? If they went to school or if they wear glasses. If you wore glasses, then obviously you're trying to be smart and therefore you should be killed, right?
They were killed brutally.
Yes, yes. There were people imprisoned and then tortured, and they said if you admit to your crime, that they will let you go, but if you admit to the crime, then they just murdered you anyway.
The people in the farm, like, they told the people that they are free, but as soon as they're running, they just like start killing them.
Yeah, and one of the bad parts, one of the bad parts, is they didn't want to waste bullets, so they would often beat people to death, because that way they'd save bullets. So the communists are doing some pretty horrible things. The North Vietnamese roll into South Vietnam, and the U.S. kind of looks the other way. Is there any bad parts in Vietnam? Yeah, same, not to the degree, but similar stuff happens. If you think about it, the South Vietnamese have been working with the U.S. for 20 years, right? So this would have been your entire life that your family has been working with the Americans to protect themselves from the communists in the North. When the North Vietnamese come in, if you had been working with the South, you were imprisoned and in many cases tortured and in several cases killed. So a lot of the people that we had been working with for your entire life were tortured and killed because they worked with us. And so this is one of those times where it's really embarrassing for the U.S. That we say, hey, we will take care of you, and then we don't. So we deal with stuff inside the U.S. We don't deal stuff outside of the U.S. Now, this is the weird part. So President Ford is not elected president, right, or vice president. He is also the one president who has survived more assassination attempts than any other president. So he goes out to California to try to get everybody excited about voting for him and campaign a little bit. When he's out there, he is shaking hands, and one of the guys who was here, I should say one of the people who was here, says they saw the president, and the president is reaching out to shake hands with a young lady, and all of a sudden another young woman pushes up close to him, and you see the president kind of jerk, and the guy's like, what is going on? And then they realize all the Secret Service guys dive on this young lady. What has happened is she brought a .45 pistol into the area. She was within feet of the president. She walked up, and all of a sudden she pulls a gun out, she pulls a trigger, and what happens? It doesn't go off because it's a pistol. She had loaded the weapon, but she had never chambered a round. She didn't understand how pistols work, I guess, because she pulls the trigger and nothing happens. Now, the interesting piece is, had she been a little brighter, Ford would have been dead, right? So what is she angry about? Why does she want to kill the president? She has been following Charles Manson, so obviously she's a bit naive. I don't know, hopefully you guys know a smidgen about who Charles Manson is, but he is a crazy maniac who had his people go around and kill people. But she wanted to make a statement on environmental pollution. So you sit there and go, yeah, there's pollution in the world. How do I stop pollution? Let's kill the president, right? So she is arrested, everything's good. Now this happened September 5th. September 22nd, He is still in California. He goes to another meeting, and there he is on the street. He is talking to people, and all of a sudden, a lady, Sarah Jane Moore, decides, I am going to shoot the president. She pulls out a .38. She fires, and she misses him. Again, to me, this is pretty miraculous. She came into the town with a gun. She was an excellent marksman. She would not miss. Except that someone realized she had the gun and they took the gun away from her. She knew the president was coming in, so she decided to go get another gun. She went to a pawn shop and she got a used gun. When she got this gun, she never had time to practice. She had no idea if the gun was accurate or not, and it turns out the gun was not accurate. So had she had an accurate gun, again, the president would have been dead. But why is she angry? She's angry because of the Vietnam War. But let's walk through this. Is the Vietnam War even going on anymore? Right. The Vietnam War stopped before she tried to shoot him. She does shoot. She winds up killing a taxi driver, I believe, which is very sad. And when she shoots him, the Secret Service starts to move in, but she's far enough away. So a former Marine actually sees what she's doing, sees that she is getting ready to fire again, and this time she is realizing where the first shot went, so she is going to make adjustments, and he tackles her, takes her to the ground, and the gun is taken away from her. So I just think it's fascinating that Ford is not president for more than, he's not even president for 4 years, and he has 2 people try to kill him for things that are kind of out of his power, right? Then later, and this amazes me, he goes to the University of Michigan. He played football at the University of Michigan. He goes there and he's at a presentation and he's standing up at the front, and some kid thinks it'll be funny to pop a balloon because it sounds like a gun going off. And if you watch the video, he is talking along and you see him jump and then he continues to talk. I'm like, okay, that's impressive, because I'll admit there was a while in my life where when I heard something, I was like, okay, somebody's shooting a gun, and I immediately try to take defensive actions. So Ford is saved through all this, right? And now he is up for re-election. How do people feel about Ford? Yeah, there's some questions because people think, well, you've pardoned Nixon and, you've done some good things, but there's questions. And so some people really like him, some people don't like him. He does defeat Ronald Reagan for the Republican nomination, which I think is fascinating. So Reagan is the governor of California leader, and Ford is the Republican nominee over him. The Democrats nominated a guy named Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter comes out and he says, I'm just a peanut farmer from Georgia. Now, interestingly enough, he is the governor of Georgia. So he does have governing experience. Why would he market himself as just a peanut farmer?
Maybe he thought simplicity would win over the people.
All right, what are people angry about right now? If you think about it, what happened in the last 4 years that has a huge, huge impact on the election and people's perspective of the president?
Corruption for people who are in power.
Yes, Watergate. So all the corruption, you have the former vice president, Spiro Agnew, is removed. You have the president removed. People are like, we don't want corrupt people in office. We are tired of politicians who are just there and are going to, be corrupt. So how does Jimmy Carter say he's not going to be corrupt? He says, look, I'm not a DC guy. I'm not a politician. I am just a peanut farmer from Georgia. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting, so this gives him a positive outlook because he's an outsider. But the negative, he is an outspoken, born-again Protestant Christian. Which I think is amusing because why don't we like Kennedy? Because he's Catholic. And why don't we like Jimmy Carter? Because he's a Protestant. So you really can't go right either way, right? A lot of people are making a huge issue out of, well, are you going to tell us how to live our life based on the Bible? We don't want you to tell us how to live our life. You can't, impose your values on us. And he says, look, this is who I am. This is who I will remain. I will still be the president. I will still represent the people. It's a really close election, as you can see on the map and here. If Texas or Pennsylvania or Ohio had flipped, the map would have gone in a different direction, right? All right. So President Carter is now our president. What does he do as president? His outsider status that everybody wants really puts him in a difficult position. He says, all right, I'm going to tell the American people what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell the American people my goals, my agenda, so that they can support me. Now, the bad part is when you tell the American people what they can do and how they can do things, what does that do for all the political insiders in DC? Now they know where you're heading and they can get together and they can make backdoor deals to prevent you from accomplishing your agenda. And that's exactly what happens. Carter just comes straight into the face of DC, and DC says, nope, we're not going to let you accomplish what you want to. We have agendas that we want to accomplish. And so he struggles to get anything through Congress. And so the other thing is, if you remember, you still have stagflation. There is still high inflation. There is still a stagnant economy. In fact, under the Carter days, remember how I said that gas went to $8 comparably? You know, that if it was $2, it would be $8. You have this really high gas, and then under the Carter administration, you actually don't have gas at all. There are days where you would drive down to the gas station and there would be lines of 17, 18 cars into the roadway. People would just stop their car, turn their car off, and sit in line so that they could get gas, because you didn't know if they had gas today, are they going to have gas tomorrow? Everybody's buying it, and if they can't get new gas, then you just run out. And so it was a very difficult time. A lot of people in Congress said, hey, we need to have price controls and force the prices down. Jimmy Carter said, no, we're a capitalist society. The people who do price controls are, not capitalists. So he said, we need to try to make sure things are okay. And at the end of the day, if you have price caps, they're going to cause problems later. So he's like, let's just kind of get everything resolved. The other thing is he really pushes to balance the budget. He is like Eisenhower in a couple ways. One, what I didn't tell you is what he did before he became a peanut farmer. Jimmy Carter actually went to the Naval Academy and he worked on a nuclear sub. So he's a very smart man. He is very knowledgeable on international relations. But he is trying to figure out, how do we make things work in DC? So one of the things he does is establish the Department of Energy. And his goal is to move us away from fossil fuels. What time is this?
76.
All right, 1976. He is trying to move us away from fossil fuels, right? How well does he do? Have we moved away from fossil fuels? No, and it is almost 50 years later, right? So, well, he didn't do very well. The other thing is he says the U.S. has all this stuff. We need to learn to live with less. If things are too expensive, then maybe you don't need a TV. Maybe you don't need 100 channels on your TV, right? Maybe you can live with a little less. How do the American people respond to that? Yeah, people are like, you need to stop. We're gonna spend our money in the way we want to. He creates the Department of Education, and he moves education from state control to more federal control. He says that there are states who have less capable schools and states that have more capable schools, so he wants to have the federal government force everybody to kind of have an even playing field, right? How does that work? Still not very well, right? And then he deregulates the airline, the trucking, and railroad businesses. Why do you think he might do that?
To cut down on gas.
Yes, to reduce costs, because if you have less costs for transportation and logistics, then you can reduce the cost of all your goods, right? One of the other things he does is come up with the Love Canal. So there is a neighborhood, it is called the Love Canal neighborhood, and they decided there was a place where a bunch of factories were dumping chemicals and a bunch of toxic waste. Some people got together and they bought this area. They didn't clean it, they just built neighborhoods on top of it. Yeah, anything that you see wrong with that?
The water supply is gonna be no good,
Yeah.
We're gonna be sick all the time.
The water supply is bad, the air is bad. When the kids are playing in the ground, they are getting toxic chemicals. So a lot of the kids get sick. They are getting cancers. They are getting various diseases. And so this is one of the first times that the federal government says, you know what? This was not the people's responsibility. This was not the people's fault. The U.S. government will come in there and they bought the neighborhood and then they cleaned this area up because they said it's not right for people who are just trying to have a life to be subjected to having their kids die because they bought land in the wrong area. All right, so what else does he do? One of this is all kind of domestic stuff, right? Overseas, he changes the focus of the Cold War, and this is a big, big deal. So from the time the Cold War began, what is our primary concern in foreign policy? Containing communism. So that means that if we have a dictator of a nation who is horrible and killing his own people, as long as he's not a communist, it's okay, right? Jimmy Carter comes in and he goes, look, no, if you want people to think democracy is a good thing, then you have to stop supporting people that are harming their own people. You have to support people that are going to take care of their people. And if that means they're not as far away from communism as you think they should be, that's okay. We still want people to treat their people with decency and respect. Human rights are more important than communism, non-communism. This is a huge, huge thing, right? Because now you're starting to have to say, well, wait a minute. So this guy who we have been supporting for 30, 40 years, who has been abusive to his people, we don't want to support. This other guy who we think is kind of tied closer than we want to communism, but he is a good leader or she is a good leader and they're doing the right thing, we want to support them more. So it kind of flips things. He grants China full diplomatic status. Now, that does not mean China's treating their people good. That's not where I'm going with that. But he recognizes, okay, Nixon started having ties with China. That helped our relationship with the Soviet Union. So he says, you know what? Let's go ahead and call it what it is. The big China is the China, and so he gives them diplomatic relations. Conversely, he develops the MX missile. The MX missile has, so you have what you call multiple independent reentry vehicles, right? So you have missiles. Now, in the cone of the missile, you can actually have one bomb. You can have, when I was working, we had 3 nuclear warheads, and they go into the sky, and as they come back down, each of these can have a separate target, and those targets can be very far apart. So you're launching one missile, but you're getting lots of warheads coming down at different places. The MX missile actually has 10 of these multiple independently targeted warheads. So that means you can have one missile, and if that missile goes up, you can have 10 warheads hit 10 major targets in various areas of the country, right? Why do you think he would do this?
Scary.
Yes, it's scary. And we're trying to get the Soviet Union to say, hey, let's reduce the number of missiles. Let's slow down in our fight. And they're like, you know what? We don't need to worry about that. So he goes, okay, fine. If you want to keep building missiles, if you want to act like you're going to have more missiles, then we'll start building and we'll start doing this. All of a sudden, the Soviets come to the table and they're like, okay, you know what? Let's create a treaty and let's say we won't build these. And so they start reducing the number of missiles that they are building. He actually never builds the MX missile because the Soviets came to the table. He's like, all right, we don't need to spend the money. We'll just go ahead and take these off the table, and you take your stuff off the table, and we'll move on. Some of the other things he does, the Camp David Accords, are tremendously huge, and we don't talk about those very much anymore, but Egypt and Israel actually made a treaty. Now, why is this important? All right, when Israel became a nation, back, and I forgot the year exactly, but it's like 1948, right? Every Arab nation, their goal is to destroy Israel. So you have this ongoing fight between Israel and all the Arab nations. Egypt is the first Arab nation to accept Israel as a country and to say, okay, you know what? You guys are fine. We will let you stay there and no problem. And so this begins, we start having a lot of other Arab nations who say, yeah, you can be fine. All right, then the last thing, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. And we say, this isn't right. You guys are just spreading communism and you shouldn't be doing that. So how do you tell the Soviet Union that you're not happy with what they're doing? This, again, is one of the, it's a very, very controversial subject. The Soviets, we have the Olympics, Summer Olympics in the Soviet Union that year. And so how big a deal is the Olympics?
Pretty big.
Yeah, it's huge, right? Everybody across the world was watching it. At this point, you had your 3 television channels, and so everybody, you'd sit down and watch the Olympics together, and you'd root for the U.S. Carter says, you know what? It's not right for the Soviet Union to be invading another country and host the Olympics. The Olympics are about peace. They are about working together, and we will not send a team. And he tried to convince everybody in the world to not send a team to the Olympics. Now, if you accomplish that, that is a huge deal, right? To shut down the Olympics. he is not able to accomplish it, but no U.S. people go to the Olympics. Now, why is that controversial? I got a lot of athletes in here. Somebody's going to...
Because those athletes want to compete.
Yeah, you have been working your entire life to compete. And I'm not trying to be rude here, but I think everybody knows there is a certain time where your body is probably at the height that it will get to, right? I mean, I know I am way cool and I'm super athletic, but I actually feel like if I were to compete with you guys in a sport, what's probably going to happen?
You destroy us.
Yeah, we'll admit the truth. You guys would destroy me because I'm old, right? You guys are kind of at that peak time in your life where you are able to do things physically that you are not able to do before and not able to do after. So a lot of these athletes are like, this was my year. This is the time that I was going to be able to win the gold and have an Olympic gold medal. And now they're not able to go. So there's an 8-year gap, right? You can go 4 years before, but that could mean you were 16 and you missed the point when you're 20 and then you're 24, right? So a lot of people were really, really angry and said, this is not right. We would have won medals, and they were really frustrated. All right. Another thing that is hugely controversial is the Panama Canal. So when did we get the Panama Canal?
When we bought it from Panama during,
Yeah.
I can't remember what year.
Under Roosevelt, under Teddy Roosevelt, we bought the Panama Canal. And then we paid Colombia for the Panama Canal too. And every year we are paying money to retain control of the Panama Canal. But when Carter is running for president, people keep telling him, you know what? There's perceptions that Panama is a colony of the U.S. There are perceptions that we are down there telling people what to do, and it's making us look bad. We need to back off. So when Carter comes to office, he says, you know what? We're going to go ahead and turn the Panama Canal back over to the Panamanians. Now, do we charge them? No. We just give it back to them, which is kind of interesting. We don't charge the Colombians and say, hey, we want our money back. We just say, you know what? We're going to give it to the Panamanians. Now, this is the 70s, and he says, we will give it back to you in 1999. December 31st of 1999, we will give the Panama back. Now, this is kind of scary though, right? What happens if you give it back and the Panamanians give it to the Chinese or the Russians or someone else?
Then they control it.
Then they control it. So a second treaty that we make at exactly the same time says, you know what? Anytime that there is not a neutral Panama Canal, the U.S. retains the right to go back down, take it over, and make sure it's used in a neutral way. Right? So it is signed in 1977 and ratified by Congress about 6 months later. All right. The last thing that happens in the Carter administration is the hostage crisis. So under Eisenhower, the U.S. overthrew the Prime Minister of Iran and replaced the Prime Minister with the Shah of Iran, right? Are the Iranian people happy with this? No. What else did we do at that time? We and the British started basically stealing their oil, right? Where we said, hey, we will pull the oil out and we will tell you how much we pulled and we'll pay you whatever we think is appropriate. And, you know, but it's our decision. So the Iranians are really frustrated with the U.S. And in 1979, you have the Ayatollah Khomeini overthrows the Shah. And there's a revolution, and it becomes a religious controlled country. And so now the Ayatollah starts presenting the U.S. as the great Satan. We're a religious nation. The U.S. is an evil nation. Now, if the U.S. is evil, then if you're an Iranian, what do you want? Do you want the U.S. in your country? No. And so you have the U.S. Embassy there, and they attack the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. realizes the threat, so they send a lot of people home, but they continue to have the embassy with fewer people. And so all of a sudden, on November 4th, students seize the embassy. Now, I use that term loosely. They are called students in a lot of the stuff. They really are not students. They are religious people who are abiding by what the Ayatollah says. They come in and they attack the gates. Now, if you're the U.S. guards, when you have people running into the embassy, if you shoot them, that's going to make the U.S. look bad, right? So they try not to have this bloody massacre of Iranians in their own country. But what happens is the Iranians take over the embassy. They hold 66 people hostage. Over a few days, they decide, if you are not a white male, we will release you. So if you're a woman, we'll let you go home. If you are an African American, we will let you go home. But if you're a white male, we will continue to hold you. They hold these guys for 444 days. They keep them hostage. Now, this is bad enough, right? But the news, every single night on the news, you start the 6 p.m. news and you start the 10 p.m. news with the guys coming up and day whatever it is of the Iranian hostage crisis. And so every day people are like, why isn't Carter doing something? Why isn't Carter taking care of this? We need to make sure that they are taking care of this, right? And every day, nothing happens. Then Carter says, I've got to do something. So he gets together all of the special forces guys, and he goes, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to fly into Iran. We're going to grab the hostages and pull them out. The problem is he wants everything to be super, super secret. So he doesn't tell the Army where they're going or what their mission is. He doesn't tell the Air Force where they're going or what the mission is. He doesn't tell the Navy or Marines what they're doing or where the mission is, right? He doesn't tell them that they're going to be working with each other. They never practice with each other, and they never know where they're going. Do you see how this might be a problem? So there's no intelligence, or there's very little intelligence. When they fly into Iran to the meeting place, there are Air Force pilots who are bringing supplies and people, and the Army Special Forces guys who are going to go and take the hostages. There are Marines flying on Navy helicopters that they have never flown before. And they are flying into a desert area that none of them know anything about. The Navy helicopters act differently in the storms, the dust storms that come up. And so a lot of the Marine pilots take them back to the aircraft carrier that they're coming from. They get there and they're like, okay, we have just enough helicopters to get the Army to fly in and take care of the hostages. Except that then one of the pilots in the helicopter says, you know what, I'm not certain, my helicopter doesn't appear to be working correctly, so they decide to cancel it. When they cancel it, now the only mission is to get out and not let anybody know what happened. They start to do this, and the official word is one of the helicopters in the dust storms, as they are lifting off, hits one of the aircraft that's filled with gas, aviation fuel, and it blows up and burns all the people in both the C-130 and in the helicopter. And so you have this big conflagration, and several people die. Everyone else jumps into the other vehicles and they get out of there. But it's a huge embarrassment for the US, right? Because now you have everybody across the world, the Iranians start highlighting, hey, not only have we held the US, hostages, but the US can't even come in and rescue their own hostages. They couldn't even make it to the place where the hostages are held. Instead, they killed their own people and they destroyed their own aircraft. So it's a huge embarrassment. The other thing that's kind of interesting is, anybody ever seen the movie Argo? What's the movie about?
I don't remember, but I have.
Okay. So Argo, the Canadians actually help us out. Some of the hostages, before the Iranians realize what's going on, some of the hostages leave the embassy and get to the Canadian embassy, and the Canadians help us by holding them. And I believe there was another embassy involved as well. But they have to figure out, how do we get these people out of the country? And so what they decide to do is put on a fake movie, and they say that these guys are the directors and the actors in the movie, and they come up with this whole big scenario, and then they're able to ship the people out, and the people are able to be saved. In hindsight, since the people that are there are all fine afterwards, it's not as big a deal as it could have been, but it is a huge deal because they come in and they help the US out, right? There is another interesting piece of this. If you guys remember, we used to be the Oklahoma Military Academy, right? One of our graduates is actually one of the guys who was captured in the embassy. And so he has written books on this and talks about how he was captured. He is the one that I first heard saying, when we call these guys students, he was like, no, these were not like college students. He said he was a member in the CIA, and he said that the people that were interrogating him had training in interrogation. So this is the end of the Carter administration, and we will get to that in our next class, how they finally get released. But in the meantime, why is Ford the unelected president?
He wasn't elected vice president or president.
He was not elected to be vice president or president, right? What cost him the trust of the American people? He pardoned Nixon. All right. What's Carter's primary focus in foreign policy? Is it human rights? Not communism, but human rights. All right. And how did Iran destroy the effectiveness of the Carter presidency?
The crisis.
Okay.
It showed that, the U.S. was weak and they couldn't even rescue their own hostages.
Right. So the hostage crisis shows the U.S. is weak, and it actually destroys his presidency. He is not able to get a lot accomplished because all the focus is, why do we still have these hostages over there? So, all right, here's your readings and your questions for next class period. All right, I will ask you guys, please look at your grades. If there is a concern on your grade, let me know. We want to make sure that everybody has the opportunities. Withdrawal date is coming up, so just be aware of that. All right, I will see you guys later.